What if you could walk into any room and instantly understand what makes someone tick? Their motivations, their blind spots, the things that they're not saying out loud. My guest today has built a career on exactly this skill. Ellie Ford is Chief People Officer at Zinc and an exited founder. Zinc is a firm that doesn't just fund innovative businesses, it incubates them from the ground up. She's been called the human MRI. In this conversation, we get into why that is and how she made one of the hardest calls of her career, walking away from a once-in-a-lifetime investment, and what she's built at Zinc that looks nothing like a typical VC culture. Ellie has 3 kids and a completely different take on work-life balance. Spoiler, she's not sure she believes in it. And this one's going to make you think differently about how you work, how you lead, and how you read the people around you. Let's get into it.
Welcome to The Career Equation, a practical formula for career conversations that helps businesses and their leaders to engage, retain, and grow their talent.
Hosted by Erica Sosner, Career Equation creator, and Zoe Schofield, careers expert and equation enthusiast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Career Equation podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be with Ellie Ford, who is Chief People Officer at Zinc. She's going to share with us all about her journey from an anthropological degree all the way through exiting her own startup that she founded and now championing and supporting and enabling other people within the investment space. So it's very nice to welcome you and to spend some time with you today, Ellie.
No, it's great to be here, Erica. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the day-to-day for you and what you're currently working on.
Yeah, of course. I'm Chief People Officer at Zinc VC. So at Zinc, we invest in exceptional founders who are trying to build startup scalable companies that are looking at health of people and health of planet. So my role is really about how we find those brilliant people, but not only how we find them, how we kind of unlock them, develop them, build teams around them, that kind of thing. So very much focused on the kind of human capital, if you like, of what we do.
Excellent. And such a kind of crucial aspect. Like one part of startup is having a good, viable idea that the market needs. And the other is how do we make that happen through the people and the talent and the structures and systems that are going to help that to grow. So that sounds like a really interesting and nurturing space to be in.
You're absolutely right. And it's the kind of key bit that we need to de-risk, right? We might de-risk our products, our services, look at the market, but actually the key thing is the kind of emotional runway of the human. So how do we try and support them differently in order to take that business into kind of new places, be bolder with it? And also from my perspective, how do we create the kind of conditions for courage to do things that kind of new, bold, brave? So yeah, really important.
Nice. And that I'd be interested to dig in a bit more about these conditions and about mindset. And of course, given your background, you're sort of uniquely qualified for this, both having been in the startup space and also inhabited through your, education and kind of moving forward along that pathway, a curiosity around anthropology and people and how systems and patterns and people make things manifest. So would you mind, for people who just meet you for the first time, to give us a bit of a potted history of the key moments that have led up to now for you?
Yeah, of course. And I always start with anthropology. Like for me, it's just really important. And I think once you've kind of looked at the world that way, you never kind of unsee it. And so whilst it might seem like a really sort of abstracted degree or not have relevance, actually, I think it's been the kind of common thread through so much of my career in quite unpredictable and unexpected ways. So yeah, I studied anthropology. I then took that into visual anthropology, so documentary film. Again, a huge connection between how we think about people, culture, systems, how we platform different people's voices, and how that kind of aligns with documentary film, like telling stories from other people's perspectives and challenging the way that we're kind of framing the world. So I was doing documentary. And then again, in a kind of unexpected way, I had an idea for a startup. I ended up kind of creating that business, that venture, really completely green, not knowing anything about creating businesses, not knowing anything about the area that I was looking at creating it in, but knowing that I'd kind of seen this need in the world. It was actually around, I was traveling a lot of the time. I was making films in different places. And I was thinking, how do I find the kind of thing, bars, restaurants, theatre, etc., that people like me like? Mm-hmm. So I was looking for this kind of idea of like personalised recommendations, which now we know, with Gen AI, machine learning. Essentially, it's just good search. We're given this information all the time. But I'm talking about kind of 2005, 2006. And at the time, that wasn't how we were sort of given recommendations of what to do. So I realized I had this need, and I was like, wouldn't it be good if this thing existed in the world? And speaking to my husband, whose kind of background is theoretical computer science, and actually realizing, like with most good innovation, it happens with completely different skill sets kind of in conversation. And I was going, oh, maybe we can do something with this. Anyway, long story very short, ended up kind of building that company and selling it to TimeOut Group about 5 years later. So doing the kind of idea to exit, and then stayed at TimeOut for about 5 years, leading innovation. And then really wanted to think about how I could bring some purpose and mission back to the work I was doing. There are big problems out there that need solving. So I think I was really motivated with this kind of venturing innovation kind of lens, but with mission and purpose. So I led something called the Good Lab, which was a collaboration of 12 of the UK's biggest charities who are looking to try and raise income differently. So I guess raise funds rather than fundraise. So I built a team of people that weren't from the charity sector. So service designers, technologists, commercial people, and we created new ventures that could raise money for the sector. And then I've been at Zinc for the last 6 years, really coming in a kind of leadership capacity, but really, as I say, with that lens of how we're thinking about the kind of founders that we are investing in, how we're supporting them best, how we're spotting those qualities that will kind of go on to lead to successful founding teams. As part of that, I've then just recently launched Inflection, and that's a kind of a different take on all of the things that we've learned about the venture building process, realizing that actually it really matters that people have the space to think about kind of what's next in their career. We've got a kind of methodology around that. But
let's pick up on that now, actually, because I'd be interested to know, I know you've got this new project running, and that the ethos behind it is around careers and career dialogue and clarity. Can you share a little bit about your current incubating first thoughts about where that might take you?
Absolutely. And I'd love to. As I say, lots of people coming to Zinc with this idea of wanting to have more purpose, having more kind of impact in the missions that they cared about. We think about that as health of people and health of planet as two broad areas. And really, people are coming saying, actually, I'm really open to exploring what's next and how I do that. And as Zinc as a fund, the only thing that we could really offer them at the time was the venture builder. So go and build a VC-backed startup. And actually, as we all know, only a kind of subset of the population should build startups. And actually, the world needs many other types of solutions. We need talented people motivated by mission and purpose in all kinds of different roles, whether that's kind of corporates, charities, consultancy, policy, we need it all. And what we also realized was that actually the venture building process that we'd taken, hundreds and hundreds of people through was actually personally quite transformational. But the people at the end of it didn't always build a business, but they did come out with a very acute sense of what they wanted to be doing next. So our sense was, well, actually, if people are coming to Zinc, wanting mission, purpose, kind of impact, really thinking openly, wanting to kind of take a beat and think about the next chapter of their careers and how they could really make it count. And then we had a whole set of methodologies and tools that we used around creating a company. What if instead of iterating, prototyping products and services, you're actually iterating and prototyping yourself? And you're working out what this next chapter kind of needs to be. So we took lots of the lessons and learnings and we created Inflection really as a space that people could come together in small pods, in kind of action learning sets, if you like, community, realizing that actually other people are so important to this sense of kind of who we're becoming. Taking a coaching stance. I'm a coach, I'm a team coach. So that really matters to me, that we can kind of open up that space, but then also do it in a way in which we're meeting the need of those people to have impact in the areas and with the problems that they think really matter and they want to solve. So we created this kind of 12-week fellowship, which we've been running since May, and we're hoping to kind of build it out into a much broader offer as we get through 2026.
Fantastic. That sounds really exciting. And I love the idea of taking the kind of iterative and prototyping process and applying it to humankind. That sounds like a rewarding and interesting way to reapply that technology and way of thinking. And we're going to dive into your good and bad conversations in a minute, the conversations that made a big difference around your career. But before we do, I'd like to just ask that question really about for yourself, how at your age and stage and experience in life, you're now defining and measuring success for yourself.
It's a really interesting question. I think you're right. It really does kind of change. I was reading recently this kind of idea that for the first half of your career, you're trying to prove things. And for the second half, you're trying to improve things, right? Or improve yourself. And that really resonated because I think there's something about the kind of moment that I'm in, which is really about defining success as about the kind of quality of the conversations that I'm having, curiosity that I have, the level of learning that I've got, the people I've got around me, and also that sense of discovery and possibility. I really like that kind of concept. I think it's Pierre Bourdieu talks about kind of midlife, and he defines it in relation to social aging. So this kind of idea that actually we age not only physically, but we age kind of in every other spiritual sense when we start reducing possibility, when we start thinking that actually there's a kind of lid on what we can be doing next, which is why some 60-year-olds can seem 40 and some 40-year-olds can seem 70, right? So I think it's really important at this point in my life to keep defining success as me learning, me being open to the world, me contributing in some way, and the kind of people that I've got around me.
Yeah, and I think there's really something about that stage of midlife where you do start asking, like, is it too late? There's a lot of the questions that people come to career coaching with. Is it too late to begin a dream? What is possible for me? And hopefully moving through that to go, well, perhaps my best projects and my best years are yet to come. But I really see that kind of polarity about the question of reaching a certain stage or phase and asking what's possible, and what we open up or what we shut down can make a huge difference to our sense of well-being and to what we actually do on the back of that thought. Yeah.
And that's basically where Inflection sits. It's mid-career people that we work with, which is obviously a kind of expand and contract kind of term, but at the same time, it means that we're not working with graduates. Obviously, there's great work being done there and the need is definitely there. It's just not where we sit. And we don't work with people at the end of their careers. We work in this kind of mid-career band with people who've done brilliant things already. You know, they've already done some great things and built some fantastic skills, but they really want to be thinking about what's happening next. And that space to think, actually, we want the awareness, we want the reflection, but we also want a bias to action. Because ultimately we learn who we are in practice, not in theory. So how can we make sure that we're giving people the same experimentation that you might do if you're putting other things out into the world, but applying that to their own career?
So let's have a chance to dive into the conversations that you've had that have shaped where you've been and where you are heading to. And so the first one I'd like to hear about is a moment where you had a career conversation that you felt didn't go well, that in some way set you back. And let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was interesting actually, because when you asked me about a kind of more challenging or more difficult career conversation, I was thinking, actually, I wonder if the other person actually knew it was a career conversation. And actually, even if I knew it was a career conversation at the time, and I think to kind of give some context, I think as a child, as a student, I was always the kind of kid that was interested in lots of different things. I was a sort of generalist. I liked lots of different subjects. And I was always really confused at how people knew what career they wanted. I was like, how can, I was always kind of envious of that, like, idea that I want to be a doctor, or I know I'm going to be a lawyer or whatever. It's like, how do you possibly know? Like my family are nearly all teachers. I was definitely exposed to lots in education, but kind of not much beyond that. And I just remember thinking, if I like lots of things, there are so many things I'm yet to know. How am I supposed to make this decision? So I think that informed lots of my decisions kind of early on, because I went into my working life with this kind of sense of exploring what's possible and exploring what's out there. But I think the flip side of that, or the shadow side of that, is a degree of like indecision or doubt or concern, or feeling like, am I moving forwards? That impatience of youth, like, I've got to get on, I've got to work out what it is that I'm doing. And so the conversation that was on my mind was one when I was probably kind of early mid-20s. And in that moment when I'd felt myself being slightly more kind of open to, I've really got to make a decision. Should I do a law conversion course? Should I do this? I was thinking about doing a PhD. And I'd been doing this kind of documentary filmmaking, visual anthropology. And it was, as I say, it was at that point when I was kind of having an idea for a startup, but I was thinking, I can't possibly do anything with that. So I was pushing this idea of doing a PhD. But as you probably know, like many people will know, it's really hard to get funding. It's really hard to kind of get off the blocks with that. I was having lots of conversations. In truth, I think I wasn't completely convinced. I think it was one of those things of, it's there and I potentially could do it. So it's something that I should pursue. anyway, it wasn't working until I got this one phone call. It's quite a long time ago. So I remember the landline that I took the phone call on. It was my professor, and he was like, I've got, great news for you. After all of the kind of conversations we've had, I've managed to secure funding for you for a PhD, 4 years or something, University of Manchester. And I remember the conversation, and I just had the kind of door opened to the startup possibility. So I had these kind of two tracks. I could suddenly see the kind of glimpse of light and possibility that was in the other piece. And to be honest, I was quite fatigued with the process of trying to get the PhD anyway. And I remember him offering it to me, and it was almost too late in the kind of timeline of those conversations. And so I said no. And I remember his response to me was, nobody's ever going to invest this amount of money in you ever again. You need to take it. And I remember that kind of steely feeling of like, you're absolutely wrong. And of course, there was no malintention behind that conversation on his part. It was, he knew that I'd been wanting this, and I'd been kind of pushing this as an opportunity. And he also knew that these were really hard to come by. In his own world, this was a truth, right? It really was a truth. And what I was struck by was kind of two things. One was, actually, I don't believe you. I don't think that's true. I think there are other opportunities for me to be invested in and for people to believe in me. And I had a really kind of solid reaction to it, which was surprising. And the second thing that really struck me in that conversation was that I really noticed the kind of lack of curiosity of the other possibilities and the other things that I could be also doing. And I was really observing how he was only looking at it from the kind of lens, the position of the opportunities he saw. And so that really stayed with me too, particularly because we were talking about anthropology, right? And there's, I think, innate in that a sense of like all of the different ways in which kind of human life, the human condition kind of appears. So that lack of curiosity also really stayed with me. And it just left me with a kind of resolution that actually, no, I'm not going to do that. And it was a real moment of clarity.
It really crystallized it for you. And was there like, what happened in terms of the fallout? Because there's kind of a fallout in the moment that I'm hearing about. And then in terms of inside of yourself and the action you took subsequently, what do you feel was like the fallout from that dialogue and that moment?
I think it was really one of those situations where a kind of door closed, and I was like, I'm not going to be doing that. And then I could see the kind of other door opening. So it was a really, you know what it's like when you're in those moments when you perceive yourself to be fairly stuck or unsure if you're making progress. And then suddenly things kind of crystallize. Suddenly there's clarity. And it was like, I'm not doing that. Doesn't mean I never will, but I'm not doing that now. And as always, in these moments, you kind of suddenly see the other opportunities that are there around you. And the timing was a really interesting kind of element of this. So the funding, the conversations that I was having about the startup, again, were completely surprising and opened out to me the sense that there is always kind of other possibility or other things that are possible.
And, I kind of feel sorry for the guy because he thought he'd come bearing glad tidings, like the last that he checked in, that was certainly in the realm of possibilities. And it's so interesting for me how when people begin asking the question of like, what is next for me? What's the best next move? What would really fit and suit who I am and where I'm about? What does come in and how surprising and unexpected some of those options can be, and I guess in this case, the last conversation you had was, it would be great if I could get your support and sponsorship for this. Let me see what's possible. And so he's gone off, crowing about his amazing student. She's come back and gone, yeah, actually, I've discovered something better. So I imagine that there was a bit of a kind of, oh, who am I going to need to tell that, actually my student doesn't want the money, like that, perhaps there was some sort of social anxiety in that I think has parallels within the business world as well of, I've pinpointed just the person and then I have to come back and go, they said they'd think about it.
It's a great point. And I feel, I don't want to be kind of mean-spirited in talking about it. It was just actually, it was all about me, right?
Yeah, of course.
About how I was identifying the things that mattered to me and those kind of ideas around values, etc. And I remember also thinking, and this is just obviously we're dwelling a bit on kind of academia, but I think it's true of lots of different contexts, is that I really felt in that context that I was good at some elements of it. don't know if I was great, but I also felt there were other skills that I had that didn't have any kind of bearing in that environment, right? So this kind of idea, which I knew that I was quite comfortable with taking risk. I knew that I was extremely collaborative. I knew that I was really interested in new opportunity. I wasn't particularly interested in critique, but there were some things around this kind of notion of the expert in academia that I realized really had kind of currency that weren't necessarily aligned with the person I was and the values that I had. And so I could see how valuable it was. And there's that feeling, isn't there, particularly at the beginning of your career, but I think it happens all the way through, where you're slightly shape shifting into the thing that's in front of you. But really deeply, you know, the things that kind of aren't ever going to quite fit. And so I think that conversation was really a conversation about values and fit than anything else. And I could make that decision because there was something else that was in front of me that looked interesting.
And you're still discovering where that zone of genius is and sort of honing that insight. And I think there's a lot of that kind of feeling of, especially earlier career, of like, I could do that. Like there are so many choices, and, you know, we want to make the best of our lives and sort of invest our energy in the most worthwhile of places as determined by our values and our interests and our skills. But I always feel that when people are in the could zone, then they're in the, I am competent at that, but I'm not certain. There's a completely different energy to like, actually, you know, here's a place where my innovative thinking, my collaboration, my risk taking is welcome. It's kind of, it is integral to succeeding in that culture. And maybe that culture never occurred to me before because I'm still learning what is out there. But I'm feeling already that even though I have interest here, I don't necessarily have a sweet spot in the skills that help one to excel in this case, an academic life. And I thought it was interesting that you described that his lack of curiosity, this kind of narrow focus of this rigidity that kicks in. And I think, again, this is quite common to career conversation where it's becoming clear that the individual you're speaking to might want to diverge from the things that you both share. That there's almost a little bit of like grief, but certainly discomfort. That's like, but if you're not talking about academia, I don't know if I can help you anymore because that's the thing that I know, you know, and that anxiety in a conversation to be the person who has the answers and who knows where this person should go next and to solve it for them, as opposed to more of the coach's consideration, which is, so I'm curious about that. Like, I thought you were going to be super psyched that we got this money and you're sounding, you know, unsure. Tell me about what else has happened since, or what landscape has shifted, versus, what do you mean? We went and got this thing and now you don't want the thing. I think that's very, very common for a kind of dissonance around a career conversation. Has that been your experience also?
That resonates hugely. But I also think there's even beyond the kind of coaching stance of just saying, like, this is kind of your journey, you know, not mine. So let's kind of get curious about that, hear about that, you know, empower you in that. I also think there's even something fairly instrumental about it, which is when people are kind of entering into new spaces and they're not taking up the offer that maybe you've put in front of them, or the organization that you're in, or the promotion that you're giving, that's always an opportunity for you to build alliances, understanding, awareness, social capital in whole new environments, right? And people are the conduit to that. So the fact that you're saying, okay, you're leaving my company, you're not taking my promotion, or in this case, you're not kind of staying in academia and doing the PhD. Actually, the conversation shouldn't stop there. That should be the point where you're saying, actually, this is my opportunity also to kind of really broaden how I'm thinking about the world and the kind of the connections that I have out into very different spaces. And so I think it's that really struck me in a very visceral way in that conversation. I remember articulating it like immediately afterwards, like, I'm so surprised that this isn't something that we would have then gone, okay, like, I can't influence what you're doing and I shouldn't influence what you're doing, but let's get into where the energy is here and actually see what potential there might be, even if it's just a conversation or a connection or whatever. So yeah, that stayed with me too.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to very much elements of your personality, and that you are disposed to see where the possible are, see where the openings are, and that's very intrinsic to the way that you think about life and the opportunities that present itself. And you described it as kind of almost reeling from this particular bombshell of, but no one else will ever invest in you again in this in this way. And again, yeah, I can see the intent was, hey, this is great opportunity, this is great pot. There's time and space to reflect on your ideas, having not quite caught on to the idea that actually I'm finding that there might be like another route towards satisfaction and fulfillment in my work. But that must have felt pretty brutal to land you that way.
It felt brutal, but it was also, it felt like, how could you possibly know?
Right. Yeah. Good for you.
And again, that was the thing that kind of really stayed with me in that moment, was this sense of like, wow, it's really interesting, isn't it, when you're met with that kind of mindset. Also, I think there's something in this for me about, like, as I pull those kind of observations into career conversations that I've had with people since, is this sense of like, actually, you shouldn't be thinking about how you could keep people within roles or within organizations in order to kind of service the need that you've got, right? Although there's always going to be an element of that to it. I try and as much as possible think about it in terms of personal growth and business growth being the same thing. And so as soon as you create that alignment with where that person's going, and you make that sit with a kind of broader strategy of what's needed within the company, you unlock a whole different level of energy. But equally, the flip side of that is if their personal growth is not aligned with where the company is going and they're not situated there, let's bring that out into the open, right? And let's have a different kind of conversation about where they're going next. So I think there's some themes in that for me kind of hold across context. We've talked about like one instance, but really it's about how do you really connect to what's driving that individual, what their kind of individual personal growth and goals are, and how do you think about that within the context of the opportunity that you've got, with a kind of awareness that it might be this, but it also might not.
Yes. So an open mind to like, where is the win-win? Where is the alignment? And also recognizing that one of the successful outcomes of a career conversation can be to, give voice to misalignments and different aspirations. And I think, again, for a lot of our clients, they still feel fairly uneasy and sort of feel it to be a failure, that if a career conversation doesn't go where both people agree completely, that, and if somebody does decide to move on from the organization on the back of that, they consider that a bad result versus uncovering, misalignments and different opportunities and being able to hold that lightly. And I think in the environment that we're in now, with so much more movement and so much more kind of fixed term projects and, things just moving a lot faster, being okay with a win being we discover something that's true and we build from there. And that doesn't have, the only success isn't just long serving tenure, it's finding fit and finding opportunity, I think is a really important mindset to move into.
Completely. Yeah.
So let's talk, you were also, outside of work, you are a mother of 3. So that keeps you like pretty busy. And I'm sure that lots of listeners will be interested in the life juggle of that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you make everything work?
Yeah. Do I make it work? I hope I make it work. Yeah. I've got 3 children. They are 9, 12 and 17. So kind of a bit of a range, 4 years between them. I think what's interesting is that I had each of them in very different like career contexts. So with Luca, my eldest, I was doing the startup. So was very much kind of in that crazy volatility of trying to build something from scratch and doing it with my husband. So everything was kind of, all our eggs were in one basket. There was no predictability. We were literally trying to make something happen. And so maternity leave, etc., kind of was non-existent. It was like straight back in there and try and make this work. But at the same time, there was a lot of flexibility and autonomy around that. Leo, I had when I was working at TimeOut. And so that was quite interesting because I just joined that company post acquisition. And so there was a bit more kind of stability within that, but that allowed me to have a bit more kind of time with him, etc. And then when I had Rosa, I was leading the Good Lab and I took a year with her. And it was really interesting because I think as a parent, as a mother, how you do that re-entry back into the workplace, kind of post baby is like such a kind of moment to navigate. And I think what's interesting for me to reflect on is how I kind of navigated it due to circumstance in 3 completely different ways. And so with Rosa, I was thinking, I'm, going to get this right. I'm going to come take a whole year off and I'm going to come back in and make sure that I've got my time with her. And actually it makes the re-entry a bit more complex. you've been out of the workplace for a kind of longer amount of time. Things move on, people move on, teams move on, and particularly if you're in a kind of leadership role. So yeah, I definitely try and bring my work life into my home in a positive way. So try and use it now as ways to kind of open up vista, perspective, opportunity, people to my children, to kind of show them that actually it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. It's about the kind of whole person that you are. And actually work is hugely fulfilling and is a key part of my identity. And so trying to involve them in some of the things that I do has been really important to me.
And what kind of ways have you done that? What's worked well?
So, I mean, at Zinc recently, we've done something where we've brought in our kids to do a kind of startup, see a problem in the world and try and create a business around it and pitch that idea, do it in a group of people. That was kind of brilliant and entertaining, the kind of things that they come up with. But again, I think what's so nice in that is being in a kind of community of people who are in an environment thinking about problems in relation to possible solutions, and realizing that when you see things, you can do something with it, right? You need the right people in the room. You need the right kind of information, and you can have impact on the things that you see around you. Of course, from their perspective, they think that we're just, I guess, kind of sitting around talking about ideas and eating pizza. So I don't know if they've got a very good understanding of actually what the day to day is like. But at the same time, I think on a serious note, there is something about how they engage with the world and the kind of optimism, radical hope, possibility, agency that I hope that they can bring to some of the challenges which are kind of very real and around us.
And our second conversation is about returns and reintegrations. And this is an example of a much better conversation that you felt well supported around your career. Can you give us a bit of context and help us capture that moment with you?
Yeah, of course. So the moment was around 4 years ago. I had breast cancer. So I'd been out of the business for 6 months or so, and obviously kind of dealing with other sorts of challenges. And I think in those moments, someone said to me that when you've kind of gone through an experience like that, the question shouldn't be, how are you? The question should be, who are you? And I think there's a truth in that. When you go through those kinds of moments, you become someone else in some way. And so I think that then impacts how you come back into the workplace and the kind of work you'll be doing, apart from the fact that I think when you have those brushes with life, mortality, etc., you do think differently about how you want to use your time and time that you have. I think it takes a different kind of value and a different kind of preciousness. So kind of coming back into work, I remember having a conversation with my two kind of co-founders at Zinc about what I was going to come back and do. And I said to them, I've been kind of had a lot of time to think. I think there are probably 3 things that I should be doing in the next phase. 1 was this, 2 was that, 3 was that. And the second one was really wanting to kind of double down on my work with people. It's the thread that pulled back to the beginning in terms of anthropology, but it was also, I knew that I coached, I knew that I team coached, I knew that's where the kind of insight and impact that I could have. And I remember in that conversation, one of the founders, my CEO, saying, Ellie, yes, 1, yes, 3, but 2. You are a human MRI scanner, so you need to do more with that. And it was a real kind of moment of feeling, I think, very seen, but also realizing that actually life is about choices, and it's about sharp choices. And when you feel that kind of clarity around what you can uniquely do, okay, I can do the other things, okay, but I'm sure there are better people, but this piece I can do really well. So giving yourself the kind of validation and then the license to work with that and to really grow from that and to develop in that and create something unique in that space. It was a real moment that I've thought about lots of times since, and I've repeated to myself, because I think it was kind of pivotal in relation to where I saw my direction kind of going next. It was a moment of clarity, but it also really required, I think, the relational safety and the relational awareness and the kind of the kind of openness, I think, with those that we work with, in order to have that conversation around how to unlock people best.
Mm. And did you come back to shape a completely different role? What was the outcome? How did you move as a result of that insight and clarity?
Yeah, I came back with much more focus on a certain area of work. It was definitely back to this idea of, human adult development professionally works best when it's aligned with the kind of overall organizational strategy and seeing that in a very clear way. Of course, the thing that we'd identified was actually also really important to the business that we were building and to the work that we were doing. And if it wasn't, it would have been a different kind of conversation. But I think like as much transparency and honesty we can have around that, the better. And of course, as you say, it can go in different kinds of directions. But when it is aligned, I think it just unlocks a kind of truer type of potency and power and energy and impact, because you're not wasting time on the things that you're not best placed to do. And I think there's a really great book on this called An Everyone Culture. And in that book, they talk about this kind of the fact that everybody who's doing a job is busy doing a second job, which is kind of hiding parts of themselves. And the labour that goes into that is so counterproductive to where you could be putting your time and your energy and your talent. And so I think there's something about the crispness, the clarity, the transparency, the relational context, and therefore how that led into the work that I did next that felt like a kind of standout moment.
And you talked about the feeling in the conversation of having that holding and safety and the chance and space to explore. I'd like to hear some more about that, because again, I think that for listeners thinking about people returning after life-changing events, be they health, bereavements, adoptions, births, these things that fundamentally shift our sense of self and our priorities, that the importance of having the right frame and the right feeling around those conversations can make all the difference. What do you think was there in terms of the ingredients that other people might be able to pick up on and explore and emulate in an equally sensitive context?
Yeah, I think sensitivity is a key word in this. I think there's obviously a whole set of kind of real and material considerations that come into play when people are thinking about their careers and their roles and their next chapters and their promotions, which we can't entirely put to one side. But I think there's something about how we can get to a kind of honesty and authenticity in these career conversations, which kind of works for all parties. And what strikes me is that we often don't have that kind of psychological safety or those kinds of conversations to make that possible. So of course, it was like reliant on the fact that we knew each other very well, that I had been through something particularly disruptive in terms of me, that I was coming into that then with a kind of honesty and openness, maybe a different kind of quality to that conversation. I wasn't maybe hiding in the same way. I was very clear on the things that I was thinking about and was kind of open to where that might go. And I know that that's easier in some contexts than others. I know it's easier, for some people than it is for others. So I'm not kind of downplaying that. But I think at its kind of core, the closer we get to the authenticity and the honesty in the conversation, the better the outcome kind of across the board, the better work we do, the kind of the time frame that we're in a role is more kind of appropriate. Sometimes we stay in things too long because we're not having those conversations. Sometimes we leave too soon because we're not having those conversations. We don't open out the space. And this kind of idea of, and I think it's core to the sort of coaching stance or the coaching training of like really opening out and sitting with the kind of questions and understanding what's behind them, might seem like it's taking time, but actually there's an efficiency to that because you get to the solutions in a much cleaner way and usually one that holds.
Yes, I sort of hark back to your reflection about, I think in the book Generation X, they talk about this idea of personality ties, which is exactly that, the kind of censorship of the whole person. And again, I think there's a kind of evolution and maturity coming about in career dialogue within organizations that says actually all of you is welcome, and we are curious about the things we don't yet know, or the talents as yet untapped, or, you know, the mysteries around your motivation, which again is if for some cultures, and particularly kind of more conservative working cultures, a huge leap. And yet the importance of adding in that kind of care and curiosity, I think, can only be a good thing in terms of the ingredients that we're working with in the cultures that we create.
Absolutely. And I think it extends right through to redundancies and other kinds of moments. I think there's a completely different way that we could sit with those realities, which aren't, as I say, kind of denying material consequence, problems to be solved, but they do hold those spaces and hold those conversations differently, and also sit with change and uncertainty differently.
Yeah, the not knowing is, you know, I think sometimes we're in business unnecessarily transactional because we're very uncomfortable with the not knowing. It seems unprofessional to not know the answer about how something's going to pan out, but sometimes we genuinely don't. Most of the time, we genuinely don't. Yeah. And tell me about then your thoughts on, you know, reflecting on both of these conversations. Where are the kind of teaching moments that are informing the work you're doing around inflection and your kind of day-to-day lived experience of how career conversations are helping to enhance the success of some of the businesses you're incubating?
Yeah, I think the businesses we're incubating are kind of particular reality, right? So these are people making quite dramatic and bold leaps into a very risky kind of space, which is a startup. And it's hugely rewarding and I saw one of them last night, a founder that came at a certain point in time, just, you know, having had her third child, and she joined our venture board, and she was she said in her own words, a bit lost. And now she's just about to close her very significant, like, multi-million-pound round. She's got a brilliant company, which is really disruptive in femtech, in kind of women's health tech. So just seeing those kinds of, again, like, possibilities unfold, and that really being about seeing something in people, but also them coming together as a team and unlocking each other. I think, like, that for me is so important and so edifying to kind of remind ourselves that actually, like, this, the kind of longer we stay in our comfort zones, the smaller they get. And the impossibility, like the importance of stepping outside those comfort zones and being reminded of what could be and who you could be, that kind of biggest version of you. So I think the founder one is a really important and interesting one, but it's quite particular in some ways. I think for me, inflection feels like, and it's so kind of rooted in the brilliant work you do as well, this idea that actually we don't have enough conversations about how we're thinking about our careers and how important that is in terms of our overall kind of life, well-being, prospering, thriving, you know, fulfillment, joy, all of those sorts of things. And actually, as we're entering into the next year, next phase, these conversations are going to become increasingly important because the world of work is becoming so massively disrupted. And so some of the assumptions that we've got about how things work in terms of roles and linear and growth and, you know, prediction are just not there in the same way. And so what can we guarantee and what can't we guarantee? We can't guarantee that the world's going to be there in the same way, the roles are going to be there in the same way. What we can work on, what we can have some kind of control over, I think, is like how we're responding to it. And so how we're training, iterating, experimenting, connecting in ways that kind of open out what might come next, so that when we're in those moments of change, volatility, which, as I say, I genuinely believe are going to happen more and more frequently, we're not kind of collateral damage to that process, right? We're instead saying, no, I've been here before. I kind of know how to do this. And I know the kinds of things that will keep my spirits high, keep my hope high, also actually materially impact the kinds of possibilities that I see in front of me. So knowing that by widening my social capital, by increasing my social capital, by trying things, by putting things out there, by taking leaps that feel really uncomfortable and using that as a unit of energy, those are the things that are within my control that I can start using to really build that next chapter and that next part of kind of my professional life. So I have like a really deep or sort of strong belief that some of this work that we're doing around how we're thinking about our career is not a kind of one and done thing. It's something that we're going to be returning to every 18 months, every 6 months, really frequently as we think about ourselves in the kind of world of work.
Yes, I agree. I really agree with that. And I've found over and over that having like a modality for that self-reflection that's structured enough for people to kind of quickly grasp and kind of make use of, especially at scale in some of the size of the organizations that we work with, where they've got hundreds of thousands of people that they need to equip to have this insight. It is really important, like just having something simple and structured that everyone can dive into. But as you say, that it isn't a one and done, it is an ongoing process. So there's a bit of kind of investment at the beginning of helping everyone get on board the ship of, the great ship career equation, or whatever it is you're using as a structure and a language and a kind of methodology for that self-insight and that sharing of that self-insight. But then once everybody's on board, actually those check-in moments can be both more frequent and shorter and less structured, because the person owns their own insight. They know that there is a whole community that shares that language and that curiosity, and that any time that it's relevant for them, they can drop into a deeper dialogue around that.
You've opened out that space for them to have those kinds of conversations.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, quick, like everything else that we adapt to as humans and in organizations, it quickly becomes just the way things are done around here, as well. It doesn't take as much work, of course, as when you're initiating it for the first time. And so look, in a moment or two, if you could just go back to that first conversation that was tricky and challenging, what do you think now that you would do differently?
I would want to, in a really coaching way, point out some of the things that I was noticing in the call in him. I know that I would have that conversation really differently now. I would be saying, I noticed that I'm really curious about why. Have you thought about, and of course that would make no kind of consequential difference to me, but I think I just noticed it and sort of stopped. I think partly from the shock, but yeah, so I think I would do that differently. I also think I would feel even more solid about the fact that there were many other things and many other possibilities out there.
I mean, I think some of it's just the nature of age and stage that, being mid-20s and being in a challenging conversation with a professor or a mentor, I can imagine was a lot more daunting then to how it would feel now. But it's useful to be able to pick up on what would be that adjustment. So thank you so much for spending the time today reflecting on your own career, about where it's going next, about the conversations that have made a difference. And we will make sure to include some links both to yourself on LinkedIn and also to Inflection for people who might be thinking, wow, that would be an amazing opportunity and sounds just like the right thing for me in 2026. So I wish you every success with that. And it's brilliant to catch up with you again and have that time together.
Oh, thanks so much, Erica. It's been a complete joy.
So for more information about the Career Equation and how it can benefit your organisation, visit the website at thecareerequation.com or connect with Zoe Schofield or Erica Sosner on LinkedIn.